in Amazing. Amazing. And so I've also just dropped in the chat a link to the study guide if you want to go and take a moment to download that. It's there and we'll have it if you ever should wish to click on that. And that study guide is actually developed by one of the interviewers who you'll meet very soon. So we're very excited. Again, I'll leave this up for about 1 more minute just for everyone to get a chance to scan the QR code. As we've said, we'll have one quick poll after this just to get a read of the room. And then if you have used this QR code, you'll be able to add questions for the Q&A session at the end. Amazing. We have a lot of people who haven't read it yet, which is super exciting because you'll get the direct overview from our author and illustrator. And so then we just have one other question here with the same QR code is, are you planning on teaching Frontera? Just again to see a little bit of the temperature of the room. Okay, cool. Very exciting. Great. Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Ernesto. That'd be amazing. Yes, absolutely. I'm very excited. Would love to turn some of those maybes and not sure's into yes. Okay, well, without further ado, want to make sure that we have time to get to the really exciting piece, which is really that interview. Very quickly, as people are joining, just want to give an agenda. So we're going to start with briefly discussing kind of who we are as Reimagining Migration, why we are the ones who are putting on this webinar. Then we will quickly do introductions of our fantastic writer, illustrator, and interviewer. And then we will have the interview with Julio and Jacoby. We will reflect on the meaning of home, which is actually part of that study guide and is a priming activity that you all can do with your students. And then we will end with a very quick Q&A section. So much gratitude for you all being here. Want to really kind of overview why we are putting this together. I am Misha and I am the program director for Reimagining Migration. Now, Reimagining Migration as a mission aims to transform the educational ecosystem to ensure that immigrant origin youth, their peers, and the communities in which they inhabit flourish in a global society, increasingly shaped by migration and demographic diversification. So by harnessing the power of schools, museums, and other informal learning environments, we create these learning experiences that intend to cultivate a sense of belonging and understanding while also promoting this lifelong disposition that enables young people to thrive, kind of developing that lifelong learner, which you all are here and participating in at 7 p.m. at night to learn from people who are also as equally inspired. Now, part of our framework is this learning arc, which was developed in collaboration with Project Zero. And it was a circular process, really starting with moving stories and grounding us all in having a story of migration. We then moved to this piece on understanding migration, which is really where this novel and Frontera and why we're putting this together fits in, which is understanding life before migration, the journey and adjustment, all kind of culminating and weave throughout this turning to action and how we can build more inclusive and sustainable societies. And so we have this learning arc, and a variety of different works fit in different places on this learning arc. Frontera happens to be one of those pieces that fit into our learning arc, which is why we are so excited to have this moment to share it with you all as educators and people who might teach it in their own classrooms. Now, the study guide will also highlight this for you, but these are some of the guiding questions that, just make sure okay, there we go. These are some of the guiding questions that you will find in your study guide that kind of help you prime the novel for yourself and where it would fit into the learning arc. How do stories of migration help us understand who we are as individuals and members of the community? What do stories of migration reveal about our communities? What do they reveal about human nature? How do borders impact people's lives? What moral, ethical, and legal questions do stories of migration raise? And how do stories about migration impact how people think and act? And then how can you tell if those stories are real and reliable? So these are some of the guiding questions from our learning arc. Once again, you will find these in the study guide. These are really kind of what's grounding us with this work that we do. Oh, and I see a few more people have joined. Don't worry, the poll we had in the beginning was just asking if you have read the novel this far and if you're planning on it. If you have any Q&A questions, if you didn't get that QR code, you can just jot them to me in the chat. I'm Misha, and I will also add a chat moment in there just so that way you can, just so that way you can ask any questions that you need. And then our fantastic executive director, Adam, is also replying in the chat, so you can have those answers for you. Lastly, in terms of shaping kind of why we do this work or where this fits into our learning arc is really navigating dispositions and habits of mind. So as I mentioned earlier, part of our mission is really developing this community of students who both understand their own perspectives and others empathically, but then also work through inquiring about human migration with care and nuance, and then communicating and build relationships across differences, really understanding and recognizing power and inequity in the human experience and migration, and then taking action to foster inclusive and sustainable societies. So these are the dispositions that we're really hoping are curated in your classrooms as you navigate our material and follow that learning arc. Amazing. And that brings us to our fantastic introductions. Just want to give everyone a moment to join. Fantastic. And these are the amazing people you'll be hearing from today. First, I want to kick us off with Julio Anta, who's the author of many graphic novels and comic books for young readers and adults, including Frontera. His young adult debut is illustrated by a frequent collaborator, Jacoby Salcedo, and Si Se Puede, the Latino heroes who changed the United States, is a nonfiction graphic novel illustrated by Yasmin Flores Montañez. Julio was born and raised in Miami, Florida, and currently resides in New York City, where he works to tell narratively rich stories about a diverse range of Latinx characters for readers of all ages. Next, we have Jacoby, who is a comic book illustrator based in Olympia, Washington. He is the co-creator of the HarperCollins YA graphic novel, Frontera, with frequent collaborator Julio Anta, who we just introduced. He is also the artist on the Dark Horse miniseries, It's Only Teenage Wasteland, with writer Kurt Pyers. Jacoby has also been featured in multiple comic anthologies, such as DC's Legion of Bloom, Graphic Mundi's COVID Chronicles, and the GLAAD award-winning Young Men in Love from a Wave Blue World. And the really exciting piece of all this bringing together is you're going to hear from the interviewer, who is also a collaborator on the study guide, Sara Ahmed, who is the author of Being the Change, Lessons and Strategies to Teach Social Comprehension, and co-author with Harvey Smokey Daniels of Upstander, How to Engage Middle School Hearts and Minds with Inquiry. She's an international speaker and staff developer in schools around the world, bridging literacy, inquiry, social identity work through curriculum development, professional growth meetings, and lab classrooms. Sara currently serves as the Director of Curriculum, Integration, and Innovation at the Catherine Cook School in Chicago. She has taught and coached in public and private, local and international schools. Sara supports the development and facilitation of gatherings designed to help students and adult learners examine their own identities and get proximate to the lived and lived truth of others. When she's not meeting with teachers, you can find her running, playing tennis with her dad, or coaching soccer teams at school. And so now that you have met Sara, I'm really excited to pass it over to her because she's going to help us get proximate with this work. Thank you so much. And Sara.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Misha. Thanks for the introductions. I just want to welcome everybody tonight. I want to start by celebrating Julio and Jacoby for bringing this work into our lives and into our bookshelves. I want to start with gratitude for Reimagining Migration for hosting this. Misha's right. I was lucky enough to work on the study guide for this book, along with Sasha Guzman and Emily Francis, who are both educational leaders, and also with Adam of Reimagining Migration. So it was quite a team effort, which I loved. The minute I started reading the book, Adam called me and said, "You need to read this." And I said, "Of course, I'll read anything he tells me." And one of the things that was really important to me right away is grounded in the work that I think about a lot with kids, and that's proximity and how stories give us this opportunity to be proximate. And that really comes from my belief in the work of Brian Stevenson, who's the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, the author of Just Mercy. If you're familiar with Brian Stevenson's work, you know that he says if you want to solve the world's problems, you need to get proximate to them. And then in my work with students, I really think that means, and with all of our work in the world, I think that just really means we need to get proximate to people. And we know stories is the gateway and the pathway for that. So I want to begin by getting proximate tonight. We think about this from a reader standpoint. So no matter the age you teach, you kind of always talk to readers about how readers have a plan. And you think about that, and that's a mini lesson that we use with our youngest readers at my school and with the oldest, like, what's your plan? What's your next book? What's your right now book? And so one of my goals is for kids to get proximate to the creators. That's really important. So we're not using books as a consumption tool or to say we read this book or to check this box or to follow this curriculum. We want to humanize the creators of the stories themselves. And so I want to start by getting proximate to Julio and Jacoby. And that is really for us to just know who you were as young readers, as young writers, as young creators. Can you both talk a little bit about, we can start with you, Julio, just your identities, like young Julio as a reader, writer, and creator?
Well, hey, everyone. Thank you so much for having us, Sara, and everyone at Reimagining Migration. Like Misha said in my bio, I grew up in Miami with a really big library culture in my family. We couldn't afford to buy a lot of books, but my mom would take me to Barnes and Noble and to the library. And I was reading a lot of Goosebumps, a lot of Animorphs, a lot of these like early 2000s, late 90s chapter book series. And then I fell in love with comic books, and I fell in love with comic books through Sonic the Hedgehog. They used to do like these Archie comics, Sonic the Hedgehog single issues that I'd pick up at the pharmacy. And then as I got older, I started reading more traditional like Marvel and DC comics before the big graphic novel boom that we're currently going through now existed. For me, these books were a way, like for a lot of people, a way into, new worlds, places that you weren't familiar with. Miami is very much a Cuban American town. My family is from Cuba and Colombia, and it's very much a bubble. So, I was going through a very specific experience, and these books allowed me to experience so much more of the world. And as I grew up, I came to realize that there weren't a lot of books told from the perspective of me, my family, my community. And that's what kind of encouraged me to start writing these books. But yeah, growing up, it was a lot of Goosebumps and that kind and Captain Underpants, books that now my son reads. So yeah, a lot of that era of chapter books and novels.
Thanks so much. Jacoby, how about you? Do you have Goosebumps in your life, library in your life?
I got Goosebumps in my life for sure. Yeah, I would, other than Goosebumps, I wasn't too big of a reader growing up. It wasn't until comics really, when that's when my reading and like kind of started. It was, I think comics are a great way to get into reading and make it, I think, more accessible. Um, because I feel like not to not delegitimize comics in general, but like I think of comics like you are able to finish a whole book within 2 hours. Whereas, with other books or prose novels specifically, it's a bit harder to, go through that. And I think, yeah, that's how I kind of started. I like discovered comics in high school, and I was like, this is really cool. And there's art too. And I think like once I connected the dots where growing up I just wanted to draw, I just didn't know where or how to use that skill. And comics for me is kind of like how that started, and then just following along and reading more books. And I do wish that I knew writers like Julio when I was reading comics, because I think that would have been nice to read. But I guess that's why we're here. We're making those comics.
That's right. Write the story you wanted as a kid, right?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Appreciate that. I appreciate that so much. Jacoby, I want to come back to the accessibility and access part of and the importance of comics. Can you both talk a little bit about your leaving breadcrumbs for us a little bit about your identities leading up to sort of what inspired Frontera? Like, can we talk a little bit, Julio, about Frontera's existence in our space now in our world, and sort of how your background? There's a beautiful note in the book, I know, but most people here said they haven't read it quite yet. Can you talk a little bit about how your background, how your identity brought yourself to writing the story?
Yeah, definitely. So for anyone who isn't familiar, just a little bit of context, Frontera is a young adult graphic novel about a teenager named Mateo who is on his journey back home to the United States in Arizona. And along the way, he comes across the ghost of a migrant that died in that very same desert half a century ago, named Guillermo. And with Guillermo's help, Mateo is able to go on this journey where he experiences all of the dangers that the Sonoran Desert has to offer, but also all of the amazing community as well. And for me, I mentioned earlier that my family is Cuban and Colombian American, and Jacoby's family is Mexican American. And when we first started making comics together, we were making mini comics, just short 4 to 10 page comics about, quite frankly, often the things that we were angry about. And this was 2019, so 2018, 2019. So if you think about the political context of that time, there was a lot to be angry about, right? So and there still is, but it certainly felt like this new avalanche of everyday issues that were facing us every day. So we made comics about police brutality, about immigration, about the different ways that COVID protocols were being issued towards white communities and Latino communities and Black communities in New York City. And then when it came time for us to try to work on a larger project, we again went back to something that we were angry about, which was the immigration practices of the United States. Certainly at the time, but now we've seen almost all of them have continued. And we started talking about our own family histories. For me, like I said, my father came from Cuba when he was 5 years old as a Cuban exile, and was because of, the United States's Cold War policies at the time, was welcomed into this country and into Miami, a Cuban American community with open arms. And then my mother's family came here undocumented from Colombia, which is obviously very different experience. And with Jacoby, his family, their story is a lot more similar to Mateo's story. And because of what was happening at the time with immigration, we figured we would use that as a launching point, essentially. And through a lot of conversations with different people and research, we found this story, this Mateo story, essentially, which is one of an undocumented kid that was deported back to Mexico. And then after his family saved up enough money, they sent him back to the US to live with his grandmother. And one of the things that I love to talk about in particular is how everything in the book is based on real life accounts or real events that have happened to people. So that's kind of the background and kind of the launching off point for how we got to Frontera.
Thank you so much. Jacoby, go ahead.
I was just gonna be, yeah, as Julio mentioned, yeah, I'm Mexican American, and like, not my dad. It's my dad's side. He didn't like. He was an illegal immigrant for a while, and I think working with Julio, he has kind of shown me ways, because I think beforehand I wasn't, very aware, um, kind of just oblivious to things, and not completely, but working with Julio, I think it's been like kind of eye opening, and has kept me more aware of what I'm doing. And like, I think all his books kind of have that voice, but just seeing how my dad and my sisters have lived, and just seeing how the government has been treating Mexicans and like just illegal or just migrants, it's been kind of eye opening. And I think working with Julio has been really nice for that aspect.
Hmm. Hmm. I think one of the things that you named is so important that I don't think we do enough of in schools, and I'll speak in the I perspective, but just in my experience in schools, is that Julio, and you do this, and you've done this in a few places about the book. You name anger as like the seed for the
Mhm.
writing, and I don't think we give kids space enough to write from that pathway. I think sometimes we
Mhm.
say, okay, respond to this. I think sometimes we say, okay, write from this like memoir, and we always frame it as, whatever memoir it is, like it's not, I don't want to just use the word happy, but writing from anger is not necessarily something we focus on, but
Mhm.
we see so much writing in the world that comes from anger. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? Can you say a little bit more about?
Yeah. My first book, Home, which some of you may be familiar with, Reimagining Migration, created the educator guide for it. That was the book that I think created this fire in me to start writing and making comics and graphic novels. And it all sprung out of the family separation crisis of 2018. And it was something that, because of my background that I mentioned, my father coming to this country as a 5-year-old, and being a new father myself at the time, seeing what was happening with family separation, not just broke my heart, but made me so angry. Where I found myself so consumed with, following the news, whether it was on TV all the time or on Twitter or social media. I just found myself going down these rabbit holes that did nothing but enrage me. And, I found writing to be almost therapeutic in a sense, a way for me to exercise this rage that I was feeling towards uh, what I was seeing our government doing towards people like me and my family and the people that I grew up with. And, it also, anger for me is also what opened up studying history and looking into what exactly was different about family separation, and the way that the immigration system works today. How is that different than how it was before? And also, how is it similar? Because, growing up, going to school, even in Miami, a place that's 70% Latino, I didn't learn about, the Bracero program, for example, which is something that we tackle in this book, where the United States went to the Mexican government and essentially opened up this pathway to bring farm workers in at a time when the United States needed workers because so many were sent overseas to fight in World War II, and then subsequently disposed of them when they weren't useful anymore, with deportations, with Operation Wetback. And it's a pattern that we've continued to see over and over again. But I think we aren't taught to look back into the history of these things, right? I feel like the news moves so quickly. It makes it so difficult for someone who isn't aware of what's happened in the past to really reflect on how is history repeating itself? How are the the tracks of our history set up for this to happen again? And that's, you know, I think that's the benefit of the anger that I felt, right? That it obviously led to this work, but also in for myself to go back and learn more, which again informs the work. And you know, I feel like the more I learn, the more angry I get, and the more work I create, and it's almost this kind of cyclical thing that I'm not so sure is healthy, but you know, I think it does lead to work that that I'm proud of, and that I think, for better or worse, helps, you know, young Julio, young Jacoby, and young readers see themselves in.
Thank you for expanding on that. I just appreciate it, because even when you read the book, and those of you that are, it's going to be a gift when you do, but Mateo, he even has like these really authentic moments of anger inside the story themselves. And that was even not new to me, but really nuanced in the way that you created it, and Jacoby, how you created it in the illustrations. And so I thought this is so authentically adolescent because of their incredible sense of injustice and their incredible sense of patience or impatience, however you want to look at it, right? And so I just appreciate that. It's a seed for the educators here tonight to be able to say, like, how often are we asking kids what they do with their anger and what action they can take with their anger? And so much of that can be in writing. I want to shift a little bit to the format of the book, so both of you can talk a little bit about why graphic format, and then inside of that, magic realism as the genre itself.
Yeah, you know, and before I answer that, I also just want to say that in the midst of all the anger, I like to think that this book is also very hopeful.
100%.
And with a lot of the relationships and the people that he encounters along the way, you know, it was important for us for the book to not just be uh me just like rage typing and Jacoby, you know. It's hopeful too, right? And it ends in a hopeful place. But yeah, as far as format, you know, Jacoby hinted at this earlier, but you know, I think graphic novels are especially suited to talking about issues like this that people maybe aren't as comfortable with seeing. You know, I think I've said this before, but I feel like one of the real flaws in humanity is that we often need to meet people or see experiences on TV or in books to really empathize with people. And what I love about the graphic novel format is that you don't need, nothing is left to the imagination, right? When you're reading prose, you might be imagining what a character looks like or what their situation is like. In a graphic novel, you know, Jacoby and I can work together to truly show the reality of it and what it really looks like. Um, and you know, I think Jacoby does a beautiful job in it. If you were to look at my script, there are sections that I am very prescriptive, and there's also sections where I open it up for Jacoby to kind of just run wild. But throughout all of it, there is so much photo reference and video reference, so that we can ensure that when we're working on this, it comes out as authentic as possible. For any of those moments that are not our own personal experiences, we can make sure that these places look the way that they're supposed to look. And yeah, that's really important to us, especially in this graphic novel format.
Jacoby, do you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of being the artist behind the work there and the formatting of it specifically?
I mean, I think Julio just kind of covered it with like the reference though. But yeah, it just Julio does his research. I'm sorry. Uh, when he told me that he had that he was trying to get a journalism degree in college, that's when it all clicked for me. I was like, oh, this guy's really good at his research. But no, I think with working with Julio's script and just the format itself, I also like, yeah, like it's accessible. And I do remember while working on the book, there's a scene, it's a child getting arrested by border patrol, and I just remember like drawing it, and I just felt so defeated, not because of like drawing it, it was just like what was happening, and knowing that most of the events that are happening in this book are based off of or inspired from real things. And I just remember texting Julio. I was like, this one's really hard to draw. Like there are portions of the book where it's just like, as a creator, it was just even hard for me to get by because these are real things. Um, I think Julio's already mentioned. Other than the ghosts, these are all inspired by real events. So yeah, I think the format of the graphic novel, having the visual, it really sets it within the reader to empathize or even relate. So
Mhm. Thank you. Let's talk about the ghost for a second. I want to talk about magical realism and Guillermo. Julio, if you don't mind, just talking about
Yeah.
why this story inside a sort of capsule of magical realism.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who are familiar with magical realism, you probably know that it is huge in Colombian literature. And like I said, my family is also Colombian. So that was a kind of staple growing up. Reading Marquez or, just having those conversations just in our everyday life. And what's really interesting about this story is that the Guillermo character, the ghost, he is the first thing I had for this story. Before Mateo existed, this was a story about Guillermo. He was central to all of this. And the original idea was just that there was this ghost who died in the Sonoran Desert and has now, over the last 50 to 100 years, seen the way that the border has evolved from the time of the Bracero program, where he unfortunately died on his journey back to the U.S., to the militarization of the border with the influx of the KKK, the influx of the official border patrol, the border fences, the technology with the drones and the motion sensors and the militias as well. So that was the original idea, and that's really if you want to understand Frontera, that's truly central to it is Guillermo. And then as I kept developing the idea, then I started thinking, what happens if a teenager who is crossing in modern day comes across this ghost? What would happen? How would their stories intersect? What is the parallels between their stories? How is the border changed? How is it the same? So yeah, really central from the beginning was the magical realism aspect. And then especially when I discovered El Jefe, which is also a real character. El Jefe, for those of you who aren't familiar, in the book is a jaguar who is stuck on the U.S. side of the border fence of the Sonoran Desert, um, separated from the rest of his species that are all on the Mexican side, and that's where you'll find the majority of the North American jaguars. And El Jefe is this jaguar that, wildlife organizations have tracked through motion sensor cameras. And at the time of writing the book, he was the only known jaguar on the US side of the Sonoran Desert. We actually found out right before the book came out, I think it was in February, he was finally seen on the Mexican side for the very first time since he was beginning to be tracked. But learning about El Jefe, I just saw so many parallels with Mateo's story as well, right? Of these families separated across borders. And it also gave me an entryway to talk about the environmental issues that arise when you talk about building border walls across natural landscapes, right? But adding that magical realism to El Jefe and the way that he and Mateo connect and see each other, see themselves in each other's eyes, that really unlocked that aspect as well.
Jacoby, how was it creating the images for El Jefe?
Pretty easy, I guess. I mean, I saw pictures of the guy, so that was easy. Just had to give him a little insignia, made his pattern look kind of nice. But yeah, it also just a little fun fact. Guillermo used to be green when we pitched him, but he looked too much like Davy Jones from SpongeBob.
Yes.
So luckily our editor was like, "How about we don't do green?" And I was like, "Okay, that makes sense."
Yeah. There's a lot of changes from
Yeah.
inception to making the actual book.
Mm-hmm.
Graphic novels take a long time. You know,
Yes, they
we started pitching this to publishers in 2019, completed it in 2022, and then it came out this July. So a lot of time to make changes.
I mean, I'll say one more thing about El Jefe, but it was my favorite inquiry to do in reading the book. And I have to say, like, we tried to be really um, straightforward about in the guide how this book offers so many opportunities for stopping to do an inquiry, for kids to stop and do an inquiry, for teachers to stop and do an inquiry. So we wanted to make sure that there's space for that in this guide. So because of the way we naturally read the book, like there's so much background knowledge you want to have. There's so many opportunities to say, okay, I don't have this connection at all. I have these large gaps in understanding and why the inclusion of this jaguar. And so like, well, what's my plan to get more proximate? So there's opportunities for that. So I just want to make that a quick point for the guide itself. Misha, you read my mind about putting the images up. I want to shift into thinking about that and just thinking about the artistic and choices that were made. Jacoby, you started to talk about color choices. You started to talk about panels. The Center for Media Literacy talks so much about how graphic novels force the reader to slow down in a way that's so thoughtful. And I want to think about how the panels like all represent something. So can you just talk and walk us really through the artistic choices that were made in Frontera?
Yeah, I'll just do like a quick overview of just how the comics like process works usually. So it starts with Julio. He writes like a little script, and what I go from there is like just I work from what he writes and just draw from there, and then it goes into colors. But like I said, Julio's done a lot of research, and therefore I kind of had to step up my research game as well. Uh, and a lot of the stuff is just kind of like trying to make sure clarity, um, on a technical term, just clarity for readers, but and then so like at the panel, what was I trying to say? The on the right side of the screen with the what is this machine called? I'm completely blanking on it. That machine, um, just wanted to make sure like it's clear what is going on here, even if you didn't have a speech bubble, but also just the emotional impact. I think is something that I try to make key, and especially with expressions. And Mateo was a very expressionable character. He was rightfully angry and rightfully sad, and I think making sure that was super clear. And I took a lot of reference photos of myself being angry and sad. I'm pretty sure I have a nice crease on my forehead now because when I'm drawing, I'm also making the expression. So like you'll see me looking angry while drawing. And it isn't because I'm mad because Julio's making me draw more. It's just that's he's making me draw mad people. So
Uh,
yeah.
Go ahead. No, sorry.
I was just saying, yeah, just nailing down the emotional, I think, aspect, especially for a book like this, you know.
And I just
Yeah.
want to jump in and say also, I think when people think about deserts, they may think of like these barren wasteland landscapes. Obviously, if you're familiar at all with the Sonoran Desert, that's not what it is. But I also just want to say that Jacoby does this incredible job at bringing to life this truly, diverse and landscape of this desert, with so many beautiful colors and all of the wildlife and the plants and the trees, in a way that a book that is over 200 pages that takes place in a whole desert is never boring to look at. And I just think he did an amazing job with that.
I
All right,
agree. I couldn't agree more. Go ahead, Jacoby.
I'll build off of that. I'll just say that, yeah, the desert itself was a character, I feel like. I think that's even I was looking at the educator's guide again, and I believe it's mentioned in there, or there's some back. But yeah, I think it was interesting to show the desert and not like put like the stereotypical like movie sepia tone of like yellow over
Hmm.
the desert, and like actually show that it is like really like it has a lot of plants, and usually it's just a beautiful place, but yet it is so deadly. And I think it's also a kind of big theme within the book itself.
Yeah, we did touch on that. I mean, that you actually drew in incredible biodiversity. You can just look across like 4 panels and be able to see that. In addition to the clarity of the night sky, like all kinds of things that show up if you slow down as a reader and really look at that. With you writing in the sort of era that we're in, and you thinking about politics and how things are really politicized right now, both of you, was there anything that you had to really think about, push back on, advocate for in terms of inclusion, in terms of the art or the writing?
We were really lucky with this book. There's certainly been moments in other projects where I've had to push back. But with this book, and I think this really speaks to the importance of, if you're telling a Latino story, to have a Latino editor and to have these people in the room that are there to advocate for you. Because for all I know, there was pushback. It never got to me. It's very possible that there was pushback, and our amazing editor Carolina, stood up for us and fought back. I don't know of that happening, but I think it does speak to having our voices in the room. She acquired this book. Would it have been acquired if there had not been a Latino editor in the room at this publisher? I don't know. We'll never know. But I think that that is super important. And with this book in particular, again, no pushback. But one of the things that was important to me was to make sure that we are telling as many perspectives as possible within this character of the Sonoran Desert, right? So that's not just a migrant that's crossing from Mexico to the US. That's also the indigenous people to the Sonoran Desert, right? Um, you know, that claim this land as their own, and has seen the border shift beyond them. Prior to the U.S.-Mexican War, this was Mexico, and prior to Mexico, there was the Tohono O'odham, which is the indigenous group that we feature in this book, and who have a nation reservation on this land, and who the Darcy character uh, is a member of. And we give her room to share her perspective, and to also share a sometimes complicated perspective along the border, which is that there is often not a black and white perspective amongst people who live there, right? So one of the things that Darcy talks about is that within her nation reservation, there are people that work with the Border Patrol to keep migrants off the land, to keep people from crossing the border. But there's also people like her who set up water aid stations that provide, life-giving water to migrants that are crossing over, and that often are found dead because there's no water, and the Border Patrol pushes people to more and more remote areas. So, for us, it was really important to share perspectives that people may not be aware of, and that maybe don't generally have a voice in this conversation.
I appreciate that. The way she's framed, and the community itself as upstanders and sort of guardians of the people in the desert, moving through the desert. It's a story that is not told in the media. You don't see it. And so you have to really go look for that.
Mhm.
I want to I'm careful of our time. Misha, if you need to give us like a loud time check, you can do that, because I'm enjoying the conversation.
Amazing, you're doing
When
great.
okay, when we're thinking about, and every kid, I've been to author visits with kids, and I know what the kids would ask you right now. So I'm just going to ask
Mhm.
you both, what advice would you give looking at these images, thinking about your thoughtful process? What advice would you give young creatives when they're in a politicized era? They're wanting to tell stories, they're wanting to create. What would you both say to them right now in terms of
Mm.
their work?
Yeah. I think to be honest, I think it can be scary a lot of times if you're a young person who wants to do political work. I think from different perspectives, you can feel like maybe you're not educated enough, or maybe you've spoken out in the past and, you've felt marginalized because your perspective maybe doesn't align with, let me back up a little bit. A lot of times we talk about the quote unquote Latino perspective, without realizing that when we talk about people who are Latino, we're talking about the whole of Latin America. We're talking about two continents, the Caribbean, various generations of migration, right? A Cuban American like my father who came over in the 60s may have a very different experience and perspective from someone from Guatemala who's crossing over today, for example. Um, and I think what's important is to use your art to speak your truth and not to feel like you have to speak for an entire community. You can look at your town and you can see so much diversity and opinion and experiences in your own town. So now widen that to, your ethnic group or the world, and there's no way that you can speak for everyone. So what I would encourage people to do is to speak their truth, to do as much research as possible, to be as inclusive as possible in your work, but know that at the end of the day, it's your voice, and your voice is all that you can offer in these situations. And you can be as careful as possible, and that's what me, Jacoby, and all of our collaborators try to do. We try to do as much research as possible, talk to as many people as possible, but at the end of the day, stay true to our voice, and I think that that's the most important thing.
Thank you so much, Jacoby. I wish I had all my kids sitting in front of you right now, hearing that. Jacoby?
I think I'll just build off of what Julio said is, yeah, just doing the research and like saying it. But I would just say that, like, I think saying how you feel, and if this writing or whatever creation you're making, it could resonate with people, and those people that resonate with it will also feel like, okay, I'm not the only person feeling like this. Like, there are others like me. And I've always, even like with books like this, I feel like with our editor Catalina, she resonated with it and she gave us a chance, and now the book is out and it is resonating with people who are probably watching as well. And I think that's kind of the thing, is like, don't be too afraid as well, because there are other people that feel the same as you. And I think putting your voice out will make these people feel not alone.
Definitely.
Right. And thank you. I don't have personal experience that connects to this, but I do know when we were making the study guide, just to speak to what you both are saying, one of the writers was able to connect into the story, had a very close story to this story, and said that there's interaction with the mom and Mateo. And I just remember in the notes, kind of while we were creating, like the co-author of the guide was also like, but it would sound like this. The mom would sort of do it like that, like this. So like, make sure you include that. That's a really important thing that in that conversation that they're having right now about this, because of the choices that the parents had to make in the situation. So that is the part about feeling seen. So thank you. I want to talk. I'm going to give you both an opportunity now. You're teachers in your own right, you're educators in your own right. If you stood up in front of a class today, tomorrow, in front of middle schoolers, high schoolers, how would you teach this book? Where would you begin? How would you scaffold this for readers?
Yeah, I think so in my previous answer, I talked about, the diversity of experiences, but I think that there is a connective tissue amongst a lot of us, right? Whether that is our family's immigration stories, or maybe somebody in our community or our friends. I think that I would ask people to put themselves in the shoes of a character like Mateo, right? And it's a conversation that I've been having now, right, with the events that we're seeing happening in Palestine. I would ask people to put themselves in the position of the people that are experiencing the effects of colonization, imperialism, occupation, because at the end of the day, all of these struggles, whether it is a child that has experienced multiple, aggressions or wars in Palestine, or it's a child that is crossing a border and is undocumented because that is the only thing that he and his family see as a way to give him a better life. All of these struggles are connected. And I think that every single person, no matter what your identity is, what your experience is, can find something to latch onto in any of these stories. And at the end of the day, that is at the center of the work that I do and the work that Jacoby and I do together and any of my other books. And it is all about trying to allow children and readers of all ages that have this experience to see themselves, but then also to open up this window to other people so that they can better understand people in their community and they can better empathize. Because for me, whether it's a graphic novel or a movie or a TV show, these are empathy building machines that we need because so much in this world is asking us not to empathize with those who are feeling various forms of oppression. They're asking us to empathize with the oppressor instead. And that is what this book and all of my work is all about. So I think that's what I would say. I would say try to have your students find a way into this because every single person has some connection to a story like this.
Go ahead,
I don't
Jacoby.
think I can say it better than
I know.
Julio.
I know.
So,
I was like, we can end now.
but yeah, empathy is key. But I did like the educator's guide, the history of the border. I thought that was also very helpful.
Yes, you all did an amazing job on the
Yes,
educator
the
guide.
educator's guide wasn't. I was learning stuff too. I was just like, oh, look at that.
I'm just going to ask one last thing for you in your world in the industry. If I'm a teacher and I want to pair this with something, if I want to pair this with news articles, if I want to pair this with other texts, if I want to pair this with other, short articles, picture books, poetry, music, what are some things that you might bring in to the experience of reading this?
Yeah, I think one of the things the educator diet does really well is linking to a lot of those inquiry questions, right? So certainly that, and then I think it depends on grade level. If we're talking about high school and above, I would really say that kind of like a skeleton key to all of my work, but certainly for this book, is a book called Harvest of Empire by Juan Gonzalez. And I would say that that is a book that you can pair specific texts, whether it's from sections about Mexico or just Latin America in general, that really dive into a lot of the issues that lead to, you know, a century of migration from Latin America to the United States, and how U.S. imperialism is essentially the root cause of all of this. And then I would also say, music I think is a really great way into this as well. Los Tigres del Norte have so many great corridos songs that tell stories about, whether it's immigrants or just like working class people that I think really um, I think really pair well with this. And yeah, I'm struggling to think of any others off the top of my head for other grade levels, but I think those are two really good things that really inspired a lot of the work that I do.
Thank you. Everyone that I saw was writing those down as quickly. Jacoby, anything that you pair? Influence in your life right now?
Probably not, but probably home as well.
Good plug.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Shout out to
Did you?
Julio.
Yeah. Do you listen to music, Jacoby, as you create?
Recently, I always forgot to just keep playing the music afterwards while drawing. I would play one song at a time. I'm like, oh, it's quiet right now.
I just want to thank you both. Thank you so much. I know that everyone got a ton out of this, and hopefully that will lead people to read Frontera tonight. Misha, I'm going to send it over to you, but I really appreciate all you sharing your whole selves with us.
Thank you so much, Sara.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank all of you. That was amazing. Appreciate, Sara, that your speed and your questionings was just, I could sit here and listen to all three of you forever. I just wanted to make sure that we highlighted the author's other works here. I wanted to ask a few questions on home. We have a small amount of time, but I wanted to make sure before we did so that you got to see the artist's other works. Make sure to check it out, read it, think about if these are things you'd like to share with your communities. And thank you all so much again for sharing the night with us. I had a few quick questions that I wanted to ask just about home. And for the sake of time, we've got about 3 minutes left. So I would love to just hear from each of you, what makes something home? It's just maybe one thing that makes something home.
Yeah, I mean, I think wherever you feel at peace, right? But I think in the broader, more political question, for me, home is wherever you decide to put roots down, right? I think it can very well be the answer, the same answer to the question of who is an American or who is a whatever nationality, right? And I think it's the people that choose to put down roots there, right? Regardless of documentation or time lived there. I think it's home is wherever you know, home for me is New York City right now, but it's also Miami, you know. I think it can be multiple places at once.
Yeah, I think home for me is the people I love are just where I feel the warmest, I think. Um, just comfort, knowing when I'm not with someone, I don't feel right. And being with the right person though, it's just makes me more comfortable, and I think that's home.
Sarah?
Oh, I'm answering this one too.
Yes.
I don't, I'm the kid of immigrants, so I've learned, I have this evolving understanding of what home has meant for my parents, what it's meant for us. And I've moved a ton in my life. So I think about Jhumpa Lahiri's work and Naomi Shihab Nye's work, and they talk about home being part of this like duality and sort of hyphenated identity. So just to borrow Julio's piece about roots. I have little roots everywhere, and I have really big roots where I have a sense of belonging, which is at my parents' house.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those reflections. I just want to go back very briefly on home. We're also part of that study guide to really prime students with the conversation before diving into graphic novel like Frontera, really understanding what home is for them, how they speak about home, and really grounding. Oh, I see a comment, someone saying home for me is the classroom. Yes, so really getting at that home that is being created in each of y'all's classrooms and for your students. So these are questions and reflections that you would do with them. Thank you so much for your time here today. I know that we have a webinar evaluation up. If you could answer that or respond to that, that would be fantastic. I hope today has inspired all of you to not just get a copy, but to really share Frontera with your students and to use that study guide as a resource. And please check out our website. We have a ton of resources for educators and are constantly updating and creating more. And we are in fact looking for ambassadors who want to spread this mission and who really want to engage with us on this journey of centering student belonging and making sure all of these stories are amplified and part of our curriculum. And I will drop that link in the chat as well in one moment, but want to thank you all again for joining us tonight. And if you would please fill out this evaluation just so we can make sure we serve all of you better. Thank you so much. And if you had questions that you jotted in the chat, if we didn't get a chance to respond to those, we will also redrop our emails and you can go ahead and send us your emails. So I will drop those links in the chat right now.
Misha, I put my email in the chat too if educators have questions about how to use the guide and different things like that. So
amazing. Thank you so
thanks,
much.
everybody.
And we will, for all of you who registered, I will respond to this with all of those links as well, just in case anything gets lost. And I'm just dropping the ambassador link. That's interesting. Julio, Jacoby, thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having us, and thank you
Thank
so much to everyone who came in and listened in and reading the books and planning on using the classroom. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you everyone for checking it out.